All right, good evening. Welcome to the program. You're listening to the Soapbox here on 90.9, 104.1 WMPG, Southern Maine's community radio from the University of Southern Maine. My name is Eric. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. The Soapbox is still a relatively new public affairs program here at WMPG, and let's see, what is the elevator pitch for the Soapbox? I do not know. It's a conversation meant to be had between yourself and me. And so for that to happen, we need you to call in. So 780-4909. The conversation has generally so far been about such topics as consumerism, capitalism, democracy, and the power of working people in America. And we've been sort of pursuing the thesis that the line of demarcation, the political line of demarcation, should be moved from being between liberals and conservatives to being between the rich and working people. Why? Because working people have more in common with each other. Their interests, their aims, their goals, their needs are generally more aligned amongst themselves as opposed to between themselves and wealthy people. So that sounds like a flagrant call for class warfare, doesn't it? Well, if that's what we want to call class warfare, I would posit that it's been taking place for quite some time in America, and there's not a bitterness or where I'm not preaching the politics of resentment here, as some wealthy plutocrats would like to contend, so as to keep us from thinking along these lines. I'm talking about macroeconomics 101 and the basic principle that if you have too much wealth at the top of the economic pyramid, then what you're doing is you're stripping away the spending power of the lower underclasses, the middle class, poor working people. And if you take away their spending power, you take away the engine of the economy. Economists generally agree on that much. Where they start to disagree is on this notion of trickle-down economics, supply-side economics. And of course, we've tried that for a few decades now, and look at where it's gotten us. I'll get into more detail on that coming up, but join the conversation, please. 780-4909. Take your place on the Soapbox. I thought I'd start tonight by talking a little bit about this article, which irritated me, that I read on Huffington Post. The title is, "If You Shop on Thanksgiving, You're Part of the Problem," which I don't necessarily disagree with. The main thrust of the article was that the author, whose name, let me pull that up real quick for you. The author is making a case where he's suggesting that capitalism isn't so bad, but rampant consumerism is. Matt Walsh, he's a blogger, talk radio host, father of twins, is his little byline there. And a lot of what we've been talking about here in the Soapbox is how capitalism and democracy are fundamentally, philosophically at odds. And I fail to see from his article and from any understanding that I have how consumerism and capitalism are not intrinsically linked. But there was one thing that he said that really kind of got my hackles up, and the quote is something along the lines of, he's talking about how more and more employers, especially big box employers, corporate employers, are demanding that employees work on the holidays. And he's saying basically we're driving that demand as consumers because we're willing to shop on the holidays. And so what happens is the workers at these, I guess his argument is that the values behind Thanksgiving are at peril with this this tendency to continue to grow the shopping season, the holiday shopping season, and have it consume holidays when people should be home spending time with their families. And it's a wonderful sentiment, but elements of the argument he's making kind of irked me. One quote in particular, he says, yes, these folks choose to work at these stores. Yes, they likely knew when they signed up that they'd be sacrificing their Thanksgivings. So this sort of belies a massive economic tone deafness and a lack of understanding of the majority of people that work at these types of establishments. Okay, the current economic climate leaves very little choice in the matter at all. Citizens who are forced to take jobs, they are economically forced. Now, I'm not saying anyone's being forced at gunpoint to work at these places, but the economic situation is such that they are forced to work there. They're often buried in debt, whether it's mortgage debt or student loan debt. They have no health insurance if they're not at a job, and oftentimes, even at these establishments, they don't have health insurance with the job. They have weak, ineffectual, and most often completely non-existent representation in the structure and organization of the marketplace due to the decline of unions. So they have very little say over their hours, over their wages, and even over whether or not their jobs are part-time, full-time, per diem. What we've seen happening over the past decades is, especially over the past decade, corporations are moving to more part-time employment because they know that they don't have to provide benefits if they do so. And often these workers are regularly subjugated, oppressed, and coerced into ceding any autonomy within the workplace. So they have very little say over how the workplace is run while they're there. They're forced into submission, essentially, because they know that if they step too far out of bounds, or if they push the rules even slightly, or if they begin to whisper about the possibility of unionizing, then there will be repercussions. And they very likely may be that they lose their job. Just for example, oftentimes workers at Walmart are asked, quote unquote, to work overtime, and but they're forced to clock out, and they don't record the overtime. And if they say no, they're free to say no, of course. But if they say no, then their hours might be shortened. They might lose their job. They might have to move to a different section of the store from where they were working on. So there are these ramifications that employers will incur upon them. So no, these employees do not choose to work at these stores. They have to work at these stores against their better judgment most of the time, because they're working for wages that are not enough to live. This is why when we talk about a welfare state, we have massive federal subsidies to these giant international behemoth corporations in the form of Medicaid, in the form of food stamps, whereby the government is supplementing the wages of these people who cannot make enough at their full-time employment positions to be able to afford to live or to raise their families. That's our money, the government's money, supplementing these colossal, mega multi-billionaire corporations. That's something that we should be upset about, in my opinion. If you disagree or agree, feel free to call in 780-4909. So contrary to what this author, Matt Walsh, is it Matt Walsh? Yes, Matt Walsh at the Huffington Post, contrary to what he attempts to assert, capitalism has done little to promote freedom, I would dare say. Rather, capitalism in its current runaway, unchecked globalist incarnation is a scourge on mankind that has led to a staggeringly pernicious, altered form of indentured servitude. We no longer have slavery per se, but we have people tethered to their jobs, living miserable, destitute lives because they don't have the freedom, essentially, to switch jobs, because either they're chained to it because of health care and they can't afford to leave the possibility to withstand the possibility of losing their health care, or where else are they going to go? Wages across the board have been regularly oppressed and driven down. But just to respond directly to Matt Walsh, you cannot say that you like capitalism, but that you don't like one of the starkest representations of its core value system, which is consumerism itself. These are mutually exclusive concepts. You either like capitalism and consumerism or you don't. But let me be clear. I am not advocating a violent revolution of any kind. I'm not advocating a violent overthrow. I want to be clear about that because sometimes people get a little confused because there's a tendency, sort of a reactionary knee-jerk tendency to identify anyone talking about what we're talking about on this show right now as being radical or idealistic or unrealistic or naive or class warriors or whatever. What we're talking about here, what I'm talking about here, is something that is rational. It's sane. It's reasonable. When I'm talking about working people just recognizing that they are not alone, that they're not divided, that their interests are shared, that they're common among their fellow working people. This is reasonable. This is not crazy, conspiratorial, revolutionary thought. This is just an observation of fact. So there seems to be a growing wave of antipathy towards capitalism, and just another example of this would be another article from the Huffington Post, which alludes to a document that the new Pope Francis wrote, where he calls for the renewal of the Roman Catholic Church, and he calls unfettered capitalism a new tyranny, and he decries the idolatry of money. And in fact, he asks politicians to promote dignified work, education, and healthcare. These are not such different requests. They're not so different from what President Roosevelt asked for in his attempt at a new Bill of Rights, an economic Bill of Rights. Google that sometime and listen to it if you haven't listened to it already. He was talking about much the same thing, that in today's world, people are entitled to, as the Pope said, dignified work, education, and healthcare. These are rights of man. These are the rights of people. The Pope goes on to say, just as the commandment, thou shalt not kill, sets a clear limit in order to safeguard the value of human life, today we also have to say, thou shalt not, to an economy of exclusion and inequality. Such an economy kills. These are strong words from the Pope. Now, just to be clear, I was raised Catholic, but I am not Catholic now. I wouldn't even say that I'm particularly religious, but as far as some of the values that we've been talking about here on the Soapbox, I have to say this is a welcome change from the top of the ridiculous hierarchy of the Catholic Church. Excuse me, that was probably a little too inflammatory. It's looking at me. I am not religious. Let me just correct this, okay? I come from a religious family. I respect people who are religious. I personally don't share the belief, but I believe in a lot of what comes with religion. I believe in faith in man, faith in family, and loyalty to friends and family and community. I believe in love and decency and generosity. So I apologize if I was too harsh there about Catholicism there momentarily. So in any case, the Pope goes on. He identifies economic inequality as one of, if not his biggest concern. And he says, I beg the Lord to grant us more politicians who are genuinely disturbed by the state of society, the people, and the lives of the poor. So, why are we talking about these things? Why do I welcome this change of opinion from the Catholic hierarchy? Well, as I said before, I'm not advocating a violent overthrow. I'm not advocating some sort of traditional or militant revolution. Actually, quite the opposite. What I'm talking about is not so dissimilar, I think, from what is motivating the Pope to talk about these same issues. Is that people need to recognize their solidarity, which is a theme we've talked about in past shows as well. Because when people start to feel less alone and they recognize their common aims, their common interests, their common goals shared with the people around them, in their families, in their communities, in their workplaces, when people start to feel less alone, they start to feel less desperate because they have the support of friends and family and loved ones and coworkers and communities. They're less desperate, they're less alone, and people who are less desperate and less alone are strong. This is why the system is designed to keep us divided and to keep us separated and kind of quarreling amongst ourselves. Because as long as we're divided, we are weak, we are subjugated, and we are incapable of mounting any meaningful response or opposition to the system which is keeping us down. So what are some examples of this system, right? Well, first of all, we've got about 12 minutes left in the show. Do feel free to call in and join the conversation. I understand I'm saying some potentially provocative things here. Jump in and talk with me. This is the Soapbox. It's not my soapbox. It's your soapbox. It's our soapbox. This is a community radio station, and I'm merely trying to start the conversation. I am not an expert. I'm just a working person, just a citizen in this city, just as you are, and I want to hear from you. 780-4909 to join in, 780-4909. So let's talk about taxes, okay? Because there's a lot in the current tax structure, which is designed to keep working people down and to disproportionately benefit the wealthy. All right, so let's just give some concrete examples. The top marginal tax rate, first of all, let's talk briefly about what the marginal tax rate is. I apologize if you already understand this, but a lot of people are a little bit confused about this. The marginal tax rate is a rate of tax on your income after a certain amount. So, for example, when President Obama was talking about raising the rates on the top marginal tax rate for people making $250,000 or more, what that meant was that those people would pay that top rate only on income over $250,000. Everything below $250,000, they'd be paying the same rate that they're paying now. So if they made $251,000, they'd be paying the increased rate on $1,000. This is, by definition, the structure of a progressive tax system. As your income goes up, you pay more in taxes, but you don't pay more in taxes on the lower portions of your income, only on the higher portions of your income. So let's talk about the top marginal tax rate and how it's changed. Under Eisenhower, who left office in '61, who was a Republican, mind you, the top marginal tax rate for the 1% of income earners in this country was 91%. 91%. The top marginal tax rate for the top 1% under President Obama, a Democrat, a socialist, some breathless critics might accuse him of being, is 52%. If that's socialistic, I don't know what Eisenhower was, but it's almost half of what it was under Eisenhower, 91%. Under Roosevelt, some of his advisors were suggesting raising the top marginal tax rate to 100%. Now that would be radical. That would be something. But we've gone from 91% to 52%. The rich went from helping to support society over the past few decades by funding it through taxes, paying for stuff, paying for public infrastructure, research and development, education. They went through from funding it by paying their taxes to supporting it by lending, and thereby making money off of society, off of their community, the one in which that they live, and making money off of our backs, the working people's backs. The way that they do this is by putting their consolidated gains at the top of the income scale into treasury bills, lending it to the government. The government then uses it, pays interest on it. Of course, what we found is that this lending isn't enough. Of course, if the government was receiving revenue from taxes and that they didn't have to pay back, essentially what they did was invested it in society, and in essence, the idea, the contract between citizens, rich, wealthy citizens, the rest of us, was that we all pay into the system and it benefits all of us. So that is an investment we're making. The return is the strengthened fabric of society at large for all of us, for all of our communities, all of our families. That sounds a bit altruistic now, but that was the contract, essentially the social contract that we had previously. In the 80s, under Ronald Reagan, the top tax rate for capital gains, this is money made from investment. So this is not money made from, work. This is made by moving pieces of paper around on a desk, or I guess perhaps more modernly moving numbers around on a computer screen. The top tax rate for capital gains was 35% under Ronald Reagan, the lionized Republican president. Today, with President Obama, and actually thanks specifically to the Bush tax cuts, the top rate for capital gains is 15%. All right, so we've got top marginal tax rates on income, 91 to 52%. Now capital gains, 35 to 15%. We wonder why there's a financial crisis in this country, why we don't have enough money to pay for the things that we feel that we need to pay for. Well, this is part of the problem. The top 400 earners in America pay an average of 17% of their income to taxes currently. These people have more income than the bottom fifth of Americans, collective wealth. Romney, for example, paid less than 14% of income on his income over $20 million in 2010 and 2011. Now, this man is making more than $20 million, and the income he's making over $20 million, he's only paying 14% on taxes. Okay, so let's go on. Great wealth leads to great power in this country. Great power leads to the ability to benefit yourself by lowering taxes, which leads to more wealth, which leads to more power, which leads to a further suppression of the progressive parts of our tax code. You reduce the funding that the government has to maintain the stitchwork of society, and it begins to unravel, and we begin to have the society that we have now. These are important things that people need to be aware of. This is not class warfare. These are numbers. These are based on nonpartisan. These numbers are from nonpartisan government studies. Okay, in 2000, the estate tax. This is a tax for wealthy people, primarily wealthy people, when they pass on their wealth to generations when they die. This is taxed. In 2000, not so long ago, there was 55% on wealth over $2 million. So similar to the marginal tax rate system here. Over $2 million, you paid 55% on the wealth that you passed on to your family. In 2013, under our socialist president, President Barack Obama, the estate tax is currently at 35% of wealth over $5 million. So we have generational wealth rolling down, perpetuating the system and exacerbating the consolidation of wealth at the top of our economic system. And there again is a significant loss of revenue to our government, to our society. Meanwhile, payroll taxes, which affect only people who make less than $110,000 a year, which is quite a lot of money, but that's the vast majority of us. Payroll taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, tolls, these things have all been going up over the same period of time as the wealthy tax rates have been going down. Now, this is regressive by definition, okay? This is regressive taxes because these taxes disproportionately affect working people. And the reason that is because we pay a bigger percentage of our income to these taxes, payroll taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, tolls, stuff like this, than do the rich. This is the definition of regressive taxation. So now we're already coming up on the end of the show here. 780-4909 if you want to jump in. Let me finish. I want to try and run through some of these last facts about taxes, okay, before next week. I keep on hoping to get to the solutions part of our discussion here for the past 4 weeks, and I haven't been able to get to it because there's so many problems. But real quick here, let's see. So people talk about the generosity of the rich being our salvation and pulling us out of this quagmire that we're currently in. But let's talk about who they're giving their money to, okay? They're tax-deductible charitable donations. They're making investments with these donations in prestige and in lifestyles. The contributions that they make do not go to the poor. They most often, well, they do not always go to the poor. They mostly go to large universities, which have legacy admission systems so that they're really, effectively ensuring that their children will get admitted to these prestigious universities, opera houses, museums, other places where the wealthy recreate and spend their leisure time. Now, obviously, art and education are important and deserve funding, and people are free to give their money where they wish. But these institutions do not help the majority of us, the poor working people of this country. And as a result of these donations being tax deductible, we lost $50 billion of income last year, of revenue, I should say, for the government because of this quote-unquote charitable giving. Now, that's $50 billion that could have been used for assistance for poor people, for food programs, for health care, for education, but it wasn't. We have 1 minute left in the show, and I'm just getting going. But, okay, well, let's see here. Let me end with this little factoid for you. Spending on education, infrastructure, research and development, things for the public good, a phrase which is very rarely used now, but spending as a percentage of our overall GDP, in the 70s on these things for the public good, it was at 12% of GDP. Now, it is less than 3%, the spending on education, infrastructure, and research and development. This is a problem, and we are reaping the effects of this problem currently. So that does it for this week's edition of the Soapbox. Thanks for listening, and do join me. You can check out the Soapbox online at at facebook.com/thesoapboxportland, and please join the discussion, and we'll talk more there. I'll be back next week. Enjoy your holiday, and do stick around here on WMPG. Thanks for tuning in.
To read in the Bible, it ain't necessarily so.